382 will be our song of invitation. All right, go ahead and turn to 1 Peter. 1 Peter, chapter 2. Last week we finished up with verse 9. It says, "But you are a chosen race." That kind of throws, in the world today, there's a lot of talk about race, but the truth of the matter is there's really only two, right? There's the race of Christians and the race of non-Christians. When you put it into that terminology, it kind of brings things into focus. The Lord's church the Lord is, everybody tries their very best to be fair to everyone. They try to look at everybody the same way, but our God is exactly that. He places no more importance on one person. He is blind to everything other than our hearts and how we act towards Him, which is good. We serve a completely fair and just God. But anyway, he says, you are a chosen race. That means we've been chosen. Does that mean individually? Of course not. That's a Calvinist doctrine, and we don't find that anywhere in Scripture. There was a group of people that were going to be saved. They were predestined to be saved. But it's our determination whether we are going to be a part of that group, right? That's our choice. All right. God made His choice. He said, these are the people that I will bring to me. These are people who follow my Son, who obey my Son. So it's up to us whether we're going to be a part of that group of people or not. So there's two decisions to be made. God made His decision, now it's up to us. But He says, you are a chosen race. You're a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession. We talked about that a little bit last week, so let's continue on. He says, and continuing this on, a people for His own possession. Why? That you may what? Verse 9. You may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of darkness. Where? There's two things, right? There's two things. We're either in the dark or we're in the light. All right? When we're in sin, we're in the darkness. Is there anything that we can do to light up the darkness? No. There is only light in God. There's nothing we can do to light up the darkness. If we're in sin, we are in darkness, and there's nothing that we can do about it other than what? Be brought out of sin. Do we get ourselves out of sin? Do we get ourselves out of sin? Okay. All right. I understand what you mean, though. We have a choice to make. We can either sit in the dark in sin, or we can call on the one who will get us out of darkness. We can't do it in ourselves. That idea, we do not save ourselves. We act towards our own salvation, but God saves us. All right. So he says, we do all of these things. We're a royal priesthood. We're a chosen group. But what do we do when we are part of that? There's a responsibility, and I would say that it's even more than a responsibility. It's a privilege, because what do we do when we're in the Lord's body? It says that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of that darkness. So what does that entail for us as Christians? What is part of what we do? There's the word I was really looking for. We tell the world, we glorify God. We give Him the glory. We tell people that, they say, well, you think that you're responsible for your own salvation. No, I believe that God saves me, but I believe that I do what God tells me to do so that He will save me, so that He will call me out, so He will pull me out of my sin. But I have a responsibility, I have a part to play in that, but God is the one that does it. I don't save myself. I act towards my own salvation, but I don't save myself. So when people say, well, you think that you're responsible for your own salvation. No, I don't. I'm thankful that God has done this for me. I acted towards it, but at the end of the day, I could have gone down into that water and gotten wet and gone down into it and been brought back up again. But without God at the heart of that, all I'm doing is getting a really meager bath. That's really all I've done. I've done, as it says in, as well as in 1 Peter, I've washed away the filth of the flesh. All I've done is gotten my skin clean, but I haven't washed my soul. Right? So when we are called into the priesthood, when we become priests of the Lord's church, when we are part of that chosen race that has been called out of that darkness, my responsibility is that I may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called me out of that. So we need not be ashamed of being Christians. And I think for a long time, a lot of people they felt They felt ill at ease proclaiming His glory. And truth be told, there is something to be said for people who I'm trying to say it without sounding like I'm condemning them for it. The idea of those folks who every breath out of them is God, 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 God. And I think what happens is the world looks at those people and think give it a rest a little bit. But the truth of the matter is, whether I'm saying it out loud or not, in my heart I glorify God. With my lips I glorify God, and I take every opportunity to do so. Okay. So this is what he says. You've been called out of that. You've been put into this priesthood. You're part of the Lord's church. You're part of this chosen race. And the reason that we've been called out of that is so that we can glorify the excellence of Him who called me out of the world, who called me out of the darkness of sin into His marvelous light. And again, we have one of two places that we can be. We are either in darkness or we are in light. Do you think that the world has convinced itself that it's in the light? I believe so. I believe that the world looks at its own wisdom, and we know what the wisdom of man is. It's futile. It's foolishness. They look at their own wisdom and they say, "I'm enlightened. I'm an enlightened individual because I believe this and this and this." But then you look at what they believe, and are they truly enlightened? No, they're as ignorant. They've got blinders on. They think that they're enlightened, but they are as far from enlightened as they could possibly be because they've leaned on their own understanding. They're going by their own wisdom. And we see how the world considers itself to be enlightened. Oh, I accept all of these things. I don't see anything as sinful. I believe every person has to do what they feel is best for themselves and so forth and so on. Well, that sounds like man, doesn't it? Okay? We read about that in the account of the Israelites, right? It says it got to the point where every one of them was doing what they felt was right in their own eyes. But were they pleasing to God? No, and at the end of the day, if you're not pleasing to God, then it hasn't done you a bit of good. Yep. Sure. And she had no excuse, did she? She had no excuse. God said to do this, or not to do something. He gave her specific instructions. Thou shalt not eat of, well, He said, thou shalt eat of everything other than this fruit. You're not to eat of this fruit, because in the day you do it, you will truly die. All right? So, when she did this, was there miscommunication between God and her? Did he misspeak? Was she paying attention? No, because we read when she was talking to the serpent, she said, but the Lord said that with the day that we eat of it, so she heard Him. She understood what He had to say. There was no miscommunication. The end of the day, she decided what she was going to do something that would be acceptable to her. How's that any? I mean, there is nothing has changed in the world, has it? Nothing has changed. We're still as pig-headed, ignorant, and bullheaded as we were back in the days of Adam and Eve. We hear the word of the Lord. We see what it says, and in many cases, there's no miscommunication or misunderstanding. We've just decided that we're going to do what we want to do. And at the end of the day, what are we going to reap from that? If not in this life and the next. The same thing that Eve reaped. What did she reap? Death. She reaped death. Okay? Fortunately, the Lord took pity on them. The Lord took mercy on them and allowed them to live. But here's the difference. What's going to happen when we die in our sin? Is there going to be any mercy? Is God going to relent? Is God going to repent? No. His determination is that when we die, our soul is destined for a place. And what have we done? We're either in the darkness or we're in the light. All right. So look at verse 10. He says, "Once you were not a people," and that's absolutely true, right? We were not a people. There were God's chosen, the Jews, and there was everyone else, the nations, the Gentiles. There was no holy nation amongst the Gentiles. They had no part of the covenant with God. So before, we were not a people, as far as the Gentiles are concerned. You are not a people. But now, what does Peter say that they are? Because they have been added to this royal priesthood. What are we? We are God's people. We are part of something. You think about all of the great empires throughout history and how magnificent they were. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold on that statue in the king's dream. Daniel interpreted, he said, "You are the head of gold." And then you had the shoulders and arms of silver, and you had the belly and and the thighs of brass. And you think about how magnificent that statue was. I still got a couple of copies of that if you want a copy of this. That's an impressive statue, any way you look at it. You think, wow, what an impressive thing. And all of this magnificence and grandeur and opulence that there once was. And at the end of the day, all of this beauty of all of these earthly empires pales in comparison to the beauty that is simply the kingdom of Christ. Everything, all the privilege that the people enjoyed. Think about the privileges we have in this country. The abilities that we have and the things that we've been blessed with simply by being born within a geographic region. I mean, it's impressive the things that we're able to accomplish. But at the end of the day, the geographic region of this country may not remain this way forever. It may change. And if Lord allows the world to continue, it likely will. It has over centuries and it will again. But as magnificent as all these other nations were and all of these empires and all of these things that we find ourselves caught up in, think about the magnificence that is the kingdom that will not die. It will never perish. Okay? So when he says that you once weren't a people, but now you are, you're part of a unique, peculiar nation that will never perish. There's something a little bit not just gratifying about it, but there's a relief to it, isn't it? It's a citizenship that can't be taken away. No man can take away what I have. And in today's world, isn't that something to kind of be relieved about? I'm grateful for that. I'm eternally grateful that my salvation can't be pulled away from me by anyone. The only thing that can happen is that I willingly give it up. All right? So he says, once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Well, that's pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Pretty simple to understand. Look at what he says here, verse 11. I think sometimes we fail to realize this, and I think the world fails to realize this, and sometimes people in the Lord's church fail to realize this. He says, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul." Look at the first part of that. He uses a word that would have been very understandable to the people who were living back at that point. That's the idea of a sojourner. All right. What is the idea of a sojourner? What is a sojourner? Yeah, they're not a permanent resident, are they? They remain for a little while. Miss Silva, you were part of the sojourners, right? You and Fred were sojourners. Yeah, it's a group of members of the church. They're typically older. They're retired, and they go places and they help out congregations. They might help build an outbuilding or do repairs on the building. I think sometimes they come in and they do. They work in the library. They do evangelistic outreaches and all of these things. But the reason they call them sojourners is that they're not permanent residents of any place that they go. They go and they visit with the congregation for sometimes 2 or 3 weeks, and then they pack up, they pull up stakes, and they move on to another location, and they stay there for another couple of weeks. The idea is that they're not permanent residents of any one particular place. They move from place to place and so forth and so on. This is commonplace back then. The idea of a sojourner, God, when He set up the nation of Israel, He said there are going to be those who are going to come within your borders. They're sojourners. They're going to live there for a period of time, and then they're going to move on, and you're to treat them kindly. Don't oppress them. We read that many of God's people were sojourners. Abram at the time was a sojourner, was he not? He was just passing through. God was kind of giving him a guided tour of everything that his descendants were going to receive, but he was a sojourner. Joseph was a sojourner, right? Jacob was a sojourner. Daniel was a sojourner. Ezekiel was a sojourner. These were people who were living for a particular period of time somewhere, but they were not permanent residents of that location because that was not their true home. Now, bringing that into today's mindset as a Christian, how are we as Christians, how are we sojourners in this world? Like the song, right? The world is not my home, I'm just passing through, I'm a sojourner. How should that help? How should we view our lives? How should we view this world if we realize that we are simply sojourners and we are not permanent residents of this world? How does that make us feel? How should that affect and how should that effect what we say and what we do? okay? You know, when you got to a place, when you guys would be traveling and you would get to a place, you didn't make permanent attachments, did you? I mean, you didn't go and get a home loan and build a house or anything like that, right? No, you parked for a while and then you pulled up stakes and you moved on. You were thinking about where you were going to be next. What else? Yes. Right. Right. Okay. Does that mean, you know, as Christians, does that mean that we should not plan for retirement? No, that's not what it's saying at all. What we're saying, though, is you think about the fellow that Jesus told about, the parable about the fellow that had prospered, and he says, I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger barns. Where was his investment? Where was he putting his investment? He was putting things in the physical realm rather than thinking about, hey, I'm not going to be here forever. Where would all of this that I have be better served? Would it be better served simply so I don't have to do anything and I could sit back and sort of take it easy? Or would it be better served towards the work of the Lord? I think that's what he had in mind. Don't put your faith in the stuff of this world. What does it say about the riches of the world? What does it say is going to happen to them? Yeah, thieves will break through and steal. Everything, you know, it'll rust. And the moth comes in and eats it, and all of these things. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't rely. Yeah, you want to make the most of your time, and sometimes that involves. Most of the time, it always involves doing what you can for the Lord. Preparing for yourself, certainly so. I mean, you know, I know that I'm not going to be here forever. I know that I'm going to die. And listen, I may pass before I get to enjoy retirement. Something may happen. We're just not assured of anything. That's another part of it. Is that if we are fleshly, and this is a sojourn, that we're not promised a long life. We're not promised a healthy life. We're not promised anything in this world. And beware of preachers who promise the physical things. You know, if you believe hard enough, I was reading today about a certain individual out of Texas who preaches, you know, you hold up that Bible and you know, the idea that we can command God to give us stuff. You know, you believe, you know, you hold up that Bible and say, this is, you know, we don't command God. God blesses us with what He blesses us with. And we accept what He gives us, and we're content with what He blesses because we know that this is not the end of it. This is not the If our hope for Christ is in this life only, we are of all people most miserable. How sad would that be? But we're not. We're sojourners. We're here for a short period of time, and then we move on to something far greater. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We don't sit around and wait for something. We don't sit around and expect anything. We're constantly at work in the Lord's kingdom. We're workers. And that's another thing that we have to get used to. And I think some people haven't quite gotten the hang of that yet. You know, we're workers. You know, we're if this was a beehive, we're the drones. All right, we get out and we're worker bees. We do the day-to-day stuff. We allow the king to do his business, and we do ours. And our job is to be responsible for the things he tells us to be responsible for. Sometimes it is. Well, it should, and I think that when we do things, there's something that a job that's done well is sometimes its own reward. But we also have to remember this: it's not something that it's not a suggestion. The Lord's not suggesting that we work; it's a commandment that we work. And when we do not work, what is going to happen to us? Will we stand justified before God? He said, "I gave you every opportunity. I gave you the talents." You know, and this one had 5 and made 5. This one had 3 and made 3. This one had 1 and didn't do anything with it and dug a hole and put it into the ground. We're not going to stand justified before God if we have not put the work in. And in many cases, it is the physical, the grinding out of our Christian existence. And we act as if we're above that. There's something greater for me. Well, no, that's what the Corinthians were doing, and that's what Paul was having to tell them. Look, God's given you what to do. You don't get to say, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do this over here. No. Here's what He told you to do. This is what He expects from you. We have no right to say, well, I'm above that, God. I'm destined for greater things. Well, like we're going to command God. Try that. Tell me how that works. All right. But anyway, and Peter's writing here, he says, Beloved, I urge you as sojourners. So we got the idea of a sojourner and what it is. I urge you as sojourners and exiles to do what? Abstain from the passions of the flesh. Now, what are the passions of the flesh? Well, I think if we look at that from simply face value, we're thinking about sexual sin or sexual desire and lust. The lust of the flesh is anything that is physical that we put God secondary to whatever this fleshly thing is. I mean, think about all the pleasures of the flesh: money, power, prestige, love of others. Maybe if I go off again, I'll change out the batteries. Do we put our spouse above God? I'm not saying that we do. I'm saying if we do, that's unacceptable. My spouse comes second to God because my spouse might try to pull me away from God. Well, what good is that then? All right? Anything fleshly that pulls us away is what he's talking about here, the idea of the passions of the flesh, the desires. That's one of the three sins, three major sins, right? The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. The idea of the lust of the flesh. Eve looked at that apple and she said it was good to eat. It was desirable to eat. Apparently it tasted good. It was desirable to have to ingest. So that idea of anything of fleshly value that we put before God is what we would call the lust of the flesh, the passion of the flesh. And it's something we're to abstain from. Why is that? Well, how can we be sober? How can we look forward Okay. All right. So why does he tell us to abstain from the passions of the flesh? What use is it for us to abstain? Not what use are they, because we know they're really not of any use. Of what use is it to abstain from the passions of the flesh as we're commanded to do? Okay. All right. All right. It separates. They can separate us from God, can't they? Yeah. Yeah. The idea here is that when we engage in those, our focus, we start to lose our focus, don't we? We start to lose our focus on what's important because we become distracted with the things of the world. I've seen so many people who they try to bargain with God. Say, Lord, if you'll just bless me, I'll have more time and more energy and more ability to devote to you. There's a problem here. There's a problem with that, isn't there? Because if you can't devote your time and your energy and your love to God when you have nothing, what do you think having physical goods is going to do? It's just going to magnify an issue. It's almost inevitably what happens. Someone who cannot show love to God in their poverty is going to have a hard time showing love to God in their riches. Isn't it? But once again, that's human reasoning, isn't it? We think about that. Boy, if I was just wealthy, I would have all the time in the world to devote to service to God. And the Lord knows our heart. And you know what He's going to do? Look, you couldn't do it when you were poor. You can't do it when you're rich. Well, Lord, if I can just find a spouse, if I can just find a mate, I'll be in a much better frame of mind to devote to I'll have someone that can help me and we'll work together in the Lord's kingdom. He's saying, if you can't do it when you're single, why do you think you're going to do it when you're married? How's that going to change anything? God knows us better than we know ourselves. So he says, if it's going to distract you in this, it's going to distract you in the other. That's just, but again, human wisdom tells us something completely different to what God tells us. His wisdom is far greater than us anyway. That's true. Yeah. The relationships that we make and the physical things that we have will fail and they will go away. And then what happens? Let me ask you this. If God all of a sudden made me wealthy, and all of a sudden what would happen if I all of a sudden lost all of that? Think of it. Well, I'm talking about just losing it. If I just lost what I had. If I was unable or unwilling to serve God when I was poor and all of a sudden became wealthy, what happens if I become poor again? What happens if I lose all those physical things? Where's my mindset then? See, I've tailored my attitude towards God based on what I have rather than my relationship with God. And it does. What's going to happen at that point? We'll likely be in the same boat. I'll be back where I was, and then I'm becoming embittered, haven't I? Now I'm just angry. I had all of these things, and now this, that, and the other. God took it away from me, and now I'm angry at God. Yes, ma'am. They do. Yeah. The idea of living without whatever this is, power or prestige or fame or whatever it is, they have a hard time dealing with the issues of their lives because everything they have, for so many people, who they are is caught up in what they have rather than who they actually are. It's been said before that money simply magnifies what's already there. People who are generous when they're poor are generous when they're wealthy. But if you weren't generous when you're poor, guess what? When you become wealthy, that's mine. That's mine. And we'll take out a little bit and we'll do this. God give me more so I can give more. If you didn't give it to me in your poverty, you're not going to give it to me in your wealth. Okay. But look what he says. He says they wage war against your soul. And everything we've talked about here is talking about the idea of it wages war against our soul. You think the devil won't use money against us? You think the devil won't use fame against us? Or prestige? Or power? Or a relationship? Absolutely. He doesn't leave any study. That man's he's a trickster. He's a liar. And he will use every possible avenue to take us to hell with him. That's what he wants more than anything else. He wants to hurt God, and he wants to hurt us, and we are pawns if we allow ourselves to be. And yes, he absolutely will. He'll take a relationship that is good and pure, and he will try to make it as perverted and as twisted as he possibly can. He'll take power that has been given honorably to be used honorably, and he will take it and he will twist it and pervert it to pervert justice. That's just what he does. Satan has been at work since the very beginning. Look what he did to Eve. He didn't care about her. She was someone to be used. Look at Job. Look at what did Satan do about Job? He said, you curse him or take away what he has, and he'll curse you. Now this was a good, honorable relationship between Job and God, and Satan wanted to pervert it and twist it to make it something that it wasn't. And he accused Job to God's very face. He said he'll curse you. But God knew his servant. The question is, does God know us like he knew Job? That's what we want, isn't it? We want his relationship to be with us like it was with Job. No way. I can take away everything that they have, and they will not curse me. Not only that, they will bless me. They will remain faithful to me. Now, I like to think that if God said, all right, what he has is in your hands. Just don't touch him. If Satan Satan caused everything I have to be taken away, I would like to think, I pray that I'll be like Job. I may sit in the ashes, and I may weep and wail, and I may cover my head, and I may mourn, but will my relationship be with God the way it was before? I like to think that it was. And listen, let's be honest, we can work ourselves into that relationship. That's for us to do. Remember, God remains constant. He's steady. He doesn't move. So what's that? That's for us to move back close to him. But he says, they wages war against your soul. It wants to destroy the soul. So verse 12, he says, so this is what you do. Abstain from the passions of the flesh. So do this. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. Now the Gentiles here are those who are not Christian. They're not Jews. Not Jews, they're Gentiles, but we're Christians. We're not there's a second set of that. There's the Jews, there's the Gentiles, and then there's Christians. So he says, keep your conduct honorable among the Gentiles. Why? Because what's our entire purpose? Look at the last part of that verse. That they may see your good deeds and do what? Glorify God. God is to be magnified even at our own expense. That's it. That's it. God is to be glorified. I don't want to be glorified. Sometimes that feels good to be glorified. Kind of like a little bit of a little treat, to be, having your name spoken of honorably among, I desire that. That's nice when I'm considered an honorable person, but at the end of the day, what I really want is I want God to be glorified. Because remember, I didn't pull myself out of sin. God took me out of sin. God called me into the light. I just did what He told me to do in order to be pulled out. All right, so here you go. Any questions, comments so far? All right, verse 13. Be subject to the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme. So in other words, honor the positions of mankind and the idea of the government that's been instituted, whether it be to the emperor as supreme. Now think about how hard this was as Peter's writing to these people. They were serving under some atrocious emperors. I mean, these were men who were horrible men. They were abysmal human beings. They did terrible, reprehensible things to other people. Not just to Christians. Anyone that they conquered was subject to slavery. And I told you about the idea of the Romans. Romans didn't care who you were. To them, you were either conquered or unconquered. You were either a citizen or you were a non-citizen. It didn't matter anything else about you. There were citizens of every nation. There were Roman citizens in every nation. They didn't care anything about other than whether you were a citizen or a non-citizen. And if you were a non-citizen, you didn't have some of the rights. If you were an enslaved, captive person from a nation that had been subjugated, anything could be done to you. You had less than no rights. You had the absence of rights. A Roman could murder their slave for no reason whatsoever, and there was absolutely nothing that would be done. Nothing. No restitution, no anything. Female slaves were to be used in any way that the male slave owner wanted, and there would be nothing that would be. And that was considered an everyday occurrence. There was nothing wrong with that in their eyes. And all of this stems from the idea of their idea about who was worthy and who was not worthy. Now, here's Peter writing to them and saying, what? Be subject for the Lord's sake, so that what? The Lord can be glorified, to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or as governor, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do good and to praise those who do evil and to praise those who do good. So here's Peter writing to them, and look what he's telling them. He says, be subject to the authorities. Be subject to the authorities. But there's a caveat to that, right? When the emperor's word is in conflict with God's word, who reigns supreme? Okay, so here he says the emperor is supreme except when God's word has absolute authority, right? So God is absolutely supreme. The emperor is supreme on this earth in the time of Peter when he's writing these things. So think about what he's asking them to do, be subject. And you know that they chafed under that. You had to have. You had to have. As a right-thinking Christian who looks at the works of these evil men, and you look at it and you say, how can I be subject to these men? He says, because this is what happens. Look at what he says in verse 15. He says, for this is the will of God, that you, by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Why would that be so? How would that come about if they were to remain obedient to those who were in authority, even when they were, reprehensible human beings? To be subject to the ruling authorities, how would that put to silence the ignorance of foolish people? what would happen? Right? Right. Look up at verse 12. Look at verse 12. He says this. He repeats basically what he's saying here. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. So when we act as decent Christian men and women, even people who are maybe opposed to God, they see us as decent human beings doing decent things in a right way. And while they may disagree with us, they have nothing against us. They have nothing that they can charge us with other than being servants of God. Well, that's true. That's a charge that I'll stand trial for. And I hope there's enough evidence to convict me of that. But that's the whole point behind it. Is so that when the people who were living at that time, even the governing authorities, they looked at them and they said, well, what can we get them for? Well, they were feeding the hungry. Oh, okay. Well, they were doing good to all men. Okay. Anything else? They were praying to their God. All right, we need something more. See, what they wanted to hear was they were promoting insurrection. They were rioting. They were acting in a way that was unbecoming a civilized human being. Well, we don't have anything like that. We got no evidence to convict them on that. What do you have? They worship on the first day of the week. Okay, you got to have more than that. You got to give me something more than that. We got nothing against them. That's exactly what we want. Even today, do we want the world looking at us and saying they're rabble rousers? They're constantly stirring the pot? No, we want the world to see us as simple, God-fearing Christian men and women who worship peacefully amongst everyone that surrounds us in the world. Remember we said this morning that Jesus was going to reign amongst, even in the middle of his enemies. That's exactly what we want to see. He still rules over us. No matter what the government, anyone else does, God still reigns through his Son over us, and we remain peaceable, decent, honorable citizens of this country and a kingdom that can never be destroyed. All right, and that's important. All right. Let's see. We'll get through this today. That's all right. Going through this just a little bit. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. That's pretty straightforward. We understand that. Honor everyone. Does that mean that we have respect for everyone? No, we show respect for everyone. As basically as human beings, we have a deserving and a need for respect. And that's what we're supposed to do. Yep. Well, there's a respect for person, and then there's respect for their actions. It's like the idea of loving the sinner but hating the sin. It's the same thing. I'll show respect towards someone no matter what they might say or what they might do. I'm going to respect them as a human being. And this is the reason why. At the end of the day, they're a human being, and how does God feel about them? That they're deserving of the gospel. Yeah, he loves them. No matter how badly they've behaved. And that's how God views them. That's how God views them. And the idea of respect here is not respecting what they're doing, but respecting what they are. They're a soul in need of salvation. And if God views them that way, then that's how we're supposed to view them. And we may find what they say and what they do reprehensible. I mean, listen, there's some people with some awful viewpoints, and their actions are horrible. But you think about these people. You go to a maximum security prison, and I've done a little bit of research and some reading into stuff like. Some of the things those men and women are in there for are some of the most heinous, some of the most brutal, some of the most perverted things that if you sat down and tried to think up what they did, you wouldn't come up with what they've done. All you have to do is read reports of things that people have done to other people, to themselves, to children, to whatever. And you look at it and you think, how in the world? But you know how God views them? They're souls in need of salvation. And that idea, we respect them. We may hate what they've done, but in that way, we respect them. Because they obviously are without Christ. In that regard, God's one of the ones that is the one that's going to mete out judgment. Now, can we judge an action? I can judge an action whether it's righteous or unrighteous because of what it is. You know, I have the ability to do that, and I have the obligation to exercise a righteous judgment, but I'm in no position to condemn them. I can't condemn them. That's our God to do. My responsibility, what my hope is that I can get them where they're not going to be under that condemnation. Right? That's what we want, is we want to pull people out. I think sometimes our desire for justice extends to and includes making sure that they die in their sins. Yeah. We need, you know, get rid of them. Well, what about their soul? You don't understand what they did. You don't understand what this person did. Yeah, but let's think about what Christ was able to forgive. Think about what God was able to forgive. You know, you look at the early church. You think that there weren't murderers in the early church? You think that there weren't abusers in the early church? Drunkards in the early church? Blasphemers in the early church? Some of the people in the early church were the ones that were screaming for Christ's blood. Those people that were saved on Pentecost, some of those men were the ones that were screaming for the blood of Christ. Give us Barabbas, away with this Christ. Give us Barabbas, away with this Christ. How did God feel about them? Anyway, honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. Just some short, very concise ways in which we are to conduct our lives. Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and the gentle, but also to the unjust. Why? Because we're slaves. We're slaves to Christ. I mean, in the true sense of the word. We've attached ourselves to Him. He rules over us. The beautiful thing is, He says, not only to the good and the gentle, what kind of master do we serve? The good and the gentle, right? He says, and essentially what he's saying here is, you basically serve two. You may serve an unjust master here on this earth, but you remember who you are in subjection to, who is responsible for your soul. This is the one that will confess your name before his Father. So we serve a gentle and a kind master, one who cares for us, one who provides for our needs, one who saves us. So don't worry if your master here on this earth, if you're a servant and your master here on this earth is unjust, if he's cruel, if he does things to you that are wrong, if he defrauds you, serve him. But remember this, you serve a master that is better to you than he is. All right, we're going to stop because we're going to get right out of time. Anything anybody else want to say? Any other comments? All right. We're going to have a song of invitation, 382, right? Right. Is there any, before we go to our invitation song, is there anyone who needs to take communion this morning or afternoon? Okay. Nope. All right, so we're going to have our invitation song, 382. If we can pray for you and with you, no matter what the problem might be, we want to help. So let us know while we stand and while we sing. Cross, Christ will meet you there.